I'm Jody Kent-Levy. I'm the director of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. We are a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we are working to end the United States practice of sentencing our children to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Many people ask us, what does it mean to sentence a kid to life in prison without the possibility of parole? Doesn't life in prison mean that they'll get out after 15, 20, 45 years? And in fact, life without parole means that these are children who've been told that they'll never, ever receive a second chance. They'll never have an opportunity for review. And for context, Charles Manson from the great state of California has come up for review 12 times, but these kids never will. In the United States, there are more than 2,500 people who've been sentenced to life without parole, and they are concentrated in 5 states. The vast majority of them are concentrated in just 5 states. California being one of them. Everyone always guesses Texas, but that's actually not one of the top 5. Texas has actually banned life without parole for children. Michigan, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania leads the nation in this practice. Florida, and did I get them all? California, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Michigan, and Florida. Yeah. Okay. So since in the last few years, since our organization was launched, there's been a tremendous amount of progress on this issue. In fact, in California, just since 2012, there have been a number of reforms that has made it possible for these young people who are serving time in prisons across the state to come up for review and prove that they're eligible or should be eligible for a second chance. The U.S. Supreme Court has now stepped in several times to limit the practice of sentencing kids to life without parole, and in doing so, they've relied a lot on adolescent development research, which shows that kids are fundamentally different than adults, and that as a result of those unique characteristics of children, things that all of us know having been teens, that they tend to be more reckless than adults, that they are more susceptible to peer pressure, that they don't think through the consequences of their actions the same way adults do. And they're also uniquely capable of change and rehabilitation. So relying on that science and relying on that research, the Supreme Court has stepped in to limit the practice of sentencing youth to life without parole. So what the campaign does is we organize a national movement to take these Supreme Court decisions and to educate policymakers around the country to help them recognize these differences between kids and adults, and to make sure that we're holding our young people accountable in age-appropriate ways, and that we're never sentencing them to die in prison. And a really critical component of our work has been, just in the last few years, to demonstrate through a lot of different sort of techniques involving public education, legislative advocacy, and litigation, just who these young people are and what they're capable of when they're given the right opportunities. And so one of the leaders in this work, probably the leader in this work, who has been the face of this, shifting this narrative in a lot of different venues around the country, is my colleague, Xavier McElrath-Bey, who you're going to hear from in a minute. I just want to say that just in the last 5 years, we have more than, or nearly doubled the number of states that ban juvenile life without parole. That said, the majority of states still allow this sentence for our young people, and we're the only country in the world that does this to our kids. So we have a long way to go. We have momentum with us. There are Republicans and Democrats alike who are working with us, who are really championing these reforms. And I think really the underlying motivation often comes from the stories of the people who are directly impacted, who are key partners in our work. And one of them is here with us today to share his story.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm a Chicago native. Really excited to be in San Francisco to see the wonderful work and creativity of Google. And I have to say that my life has been shaped by Google. And people may not have an opportunity to talk about that, but I actually base a lot of my work by using a lot of the tools that are provided by Google. And for that, I want to thank all of you. And to give one funny example, we have quarterly, we have annual reports. And one thing that we had to do most recently was provide a recap in the past year of some of our work. And one of the tasks for me in being able to execute that expectation was to identify all the media that ICANN and the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth has generated and through our particular national network. And I may have came across as quite organized and efficient, but the fact of the matter is I went to Google and I put in the search tools, I put within the past year, and I clicked all, and voila, I got my results, and it was quite easy. So I had to tell on myself, sorry, Jody. But I'm really happy to be here, and most importantly, because I was able to visit with some individuals yesterday at San Quentin Prison. Walking in, for me personally, is always a challenge when I go into a secure facility. Because to be quite honest with you, up until 13 years ago, I grew up in secure facilities throughout the state of Illinois. I was convicted at a very early age, at the age of 13 years old, for first-degree murder. I was guilty, I was responsible, and I pled guilty. But at that age, what was mostly unspoken in my life was the fact that, not only was I someone who had a very unfortunate track record of repeated arrests and convictions, but I was also a child that had endured some very horrific things early on, which sort of manifested itself in a very devastating way, in a way in which I landed in the justice system with a 25-year sentence at the age of 13 years old. I was fortunate to have a public defender, Mr. Shirley Connors, who recognized my youthfulness first and foremost. Something that at that time, in the late 1990s, 1980s, unfortunately, was not being recognized for many children. When I stood in that Sally Port waiting to be transferred over to the Cook County Court, I wasn't alone. There were many other kids that were shackled alongside me. And I remember being transferred over into the adult court. And I remember when we walked into the tunnel, we went into the tunnel of the Cook County Court, we went up a very grim and dark elevator. We got to the courthouse level, and we had to walk past some bullpens. And when we went past the bullpens, they were populated with a bunch of individuals who were awaiting trial, who had just been arrested, were being processed into their division. And I remember hearing a lot of the guys yelling out of the cracks in the bars saying, "Man, that's messed up." And they were saying all these things, a little profanity, but expressing something that it took me a while to catch on to. But what they were expressing was their anger and how upset they were that their little children, were being taken to the same courtrooms, being faced with the same consequences that they were being faced with. And I think that looking at that, in retrospect, it made me question, our own way of dealing with kids today. And if these individuals who are deemed as the worst of the worst in our society, if they can have the humanity and compassion to recognize that these were just children, why can't others, individuals who are involved in creating these systems and designing the treatment programs very early on, why can't they recognize the needs of our children who, for the most part, have been failed by so many? And so, not to make an excuse for my past mistakes, but I would simply say that I was not alone. There are many of us. We came from different communities and cities across the state, but for the most part, we had some things in common, and those things were trauma, first and foremost. Second of all, many of us were living in households that were very hostile, that struggled with mental illness, substance abuse. We lived in poor and disadvantaged communities. We lived in environments that were very toxic, non-nurturing, and unfortunately, we're producing some very poor decisions on our behalf. As early as 6 years old, I was placed into foster care. And in fact, that was the very first time I was placed in a police car for that transport. And when I got out of the foster care system 2.5 years later, I went back to the same poor and disadvantaged community, went back to the same poverty, the same struggle, and mental illness and substance abuse that took place in my home. And I wasn't able to rise above that. I wasn't able to escape the negative impacts of those traumas very early on. And so I gravitated towards the gang life. And what I think that is often, I guess, unspoken as well, is that these individuals, these kids, although they made these poor decisions, in their heart of hearts, they're really not bad kids. And that's why our motto as a national network, the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, is no child is born bad. It's not a coincidence the majority of these kids are coming from these type of upbringings. And so at the age of 13 years old, when I was faced with 20 to 60 years in prison, I had a strong advocate, as I had mentioned, my public defender, who fought very hard for me. And she convinced the judge to give me a 25-year sentence. And I know that may sound extreme, but under the old law, that meant day for day. Meaning for every good day served, I would have a day taken off my time. I would have an opportunity in my mid-20s to be able to come out, recreate myself, and start a new life. Unfortunately, individuals that I met with yesterday in San Quentin don't have that option. The individuals in San Quentin, although they were in their 30s and 40s, and one gentleman had been in prison for 40 years since he was a teenager, because of the seriousness of his offense, he's been told repeatedly by a parole board he would never be free, despite his positive change, despite the fact that he's involved himself in programs, has helped to build a sweat lodge on campus, one of the first ones in the state, has helped to mentor young kids coming into the prisons, at-risk youth who have been brought into the prison walls to learn from those who have made horrible mistakes but want to help children make better ones in their lives. And despite all this positive change, despite what's undeniable within himself, and unfortunately within many of those around him, he would never be free unless we bring about the type of reforms that we're fighting for. And that's why I'm very happy to be a part of the campaign. I'm very happy to be able to lend my voice as someone who's not exceptional, who's not the exception to the rule, but as someone who has, whose life is really indicative of every child's capacity for positive change, that none of us are beyond redemption, beyond repair. And that at the very young age of 18 years old, after having been in prison for 5 years, that I was able to reach a point of maturity and awareness that made me reflect upon my life. It made me desire something bigger and better. It made me recognize that what many of the things that I had done up until that point were not really reflective of who I really was inside, but that in fact I was a product of my environment. That in fact I was working out of those untreated traumas, those emotional deprivations that made me susceptible to peer pressure, made me more susceptible to do things that were outside my nature. But at that age of a growing sense of maturity and remorse, I decided to take control of my life. I decided to get myself involved in school, to leave the gang that I was associated with, to get my life on track, and I had sort of envisioned a parallel universe. I had envisioned my life as it was obviously within the prison walls, but how it would also look had I never been incarcerated. And I told myself at 17, 18 years old, I would have finished high school at that point. And because of that mindset, I said, well, I need to get my GED, and I knocked it out right away. And I said, where would I be at 21? And I said, I would have my associate's degree. So I pursued my associate's degree. Where would I be at 23, 24? I would probably have my bachelor's by then. And if I could have, I would have went for my master's, but I had to wait until years later. But I was able to enroll myself into a bachelor's degree program and get a bachelor's degree in social science with a 4.0 GPA, was inducted into the Franklin Honor Society for outstanding scholarship, and was really excelling academically, and was really taking on this belief that I could do something better in my life upon release. A release date that was within years away, which enabled me to have a greater hope for a better future. Unfortunately, many people don't have the light at the end of the tunnel. Many individuals, like some of the kids that I grew up with in the system, are still there today. And because of that, it's not that I carry some survivor's guilt, but I certainly carry a responsibility, a sense of responsibility that tells me that I should not forget who they are, and that I should amplify their messages and their stories, that I should make known to the world that not just myself, but many others within the system have such great potentials, that many, unfortunately, their potentials are being wasted away, that such dreams and hopes, and even better hopes for our communities, are simply languishing away there behind prison walls and costing millions of tax dollars unnecessarily. And so when we talk about reform, we're talking about not just a legal obligation and a moral obligation, but also the most common sense obligation that we have to ourselves and to our community. And not only that, but to recognize the needs of those who have been harmed, not just those who have entered the system and have experienced traumas and made poor decisions, but also those who have been impacted by violence. A great part of our work as a national network is to address the needs of the community. Many of us work in the capacity as substance abuse counselors. Many of us work in the capacity as youth development program coordinators. Many of us work in the capacity of employing formerly incarcerated folks. And so this is the work that we do in our own lives. And I often say the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, which is a national network of formerly incarcerated youth, when they came to us, they were already leaders. But had you met them in a public space or at a conference or an event, you would have never known that as children they were all convicted of homicide-related offenses. You would have never known that many of them were once sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but because pardons and because of pardons and exonerations and other legal interventions, that they're now able to be out to live a normal life and to show the world that they too, were able to recreate and start a new life. And so that is our hope for many others who are serving that time. We also hope that individuals who are out and who are formerly incarcerated will continue to work together. So we often convene annually. We train together. We work with each other. We're a support group with one another. We also, come together for workshops to help us hone our skills as advocates, to be better advocates for those who we often, in so many ways try to represent. And so that is really a big purpose of ICANN. But another big purpose of our national network is really to keep those who are currently incarcerated informed. And not only that, but also to help them understand that they're not forgotten. I understand how it feels to be incarcerated. I understand in so many ways, the sad reality, the existential nightmare of being incarcerated and feeling forgotten by society. And it's so easy for many people not to think of those who are in prison since childhood. And in fact, many family and friends often move on. But because of the big hearts and the willingness of those who are on the front lines of reform and the desire and passion they have to help see their release and life be recreated, they've been able to have something to hold on to, a hope to believe in, something to look forward to, an incentive towards positive change. An incentive that in so many ways has helped even within the system in terms of the prison stability and preventing violence. And oftentimes these are the conflict mediators. Oftentimes they are running restorative justice programs within the facilities, but are trustees. They're the ones who are entrusted with. Yesterday, the place we were in was a sort of a building that was unattended for the most part. But yet these were all individuals who were deemed as the worst of the worst. But yet there was not a single guard within that facility, and they were running their own programs. Programs that reflected upon their own sense of masculinity, their own sense of, how to overcome their trauma, who they are today. What does empathy mean? These are questions that we hardly, even entertain in free society, but yet they're digging deep within themselves to discover who they really are, to discover their own humanity, to find ways, and innovative ways, in fact, to give back to their communities, to have cancer awareness marches within the facility, to have events in which they were able to create origami hearts for kids who are in hospitals, to have events where they were able to create food can drives and food drives to give to the homeless, and all this is taking place within the prison walls. And yet, when they had organized an event, a fundraising event, they came to find that the inmates and the families gave more than the community, and that just goes to show the level of desire they have to live out that eternal apology, to give back to the communities, to sort of live out that sort of penitence that we all carry, and that desire to make amends with society. And so I hope that all of you at Google would in some ways recognize the value of their human potential, the value of what they have to offer. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jody and give her an opportunity to share about some possible ways in which you can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. I never like to follow his remarks, but anyway, here I am. I also want to just thank Jonathan for having us here at Google and mention, as Xavier said, we rely on Google daily, hourly at our office. We actually have all of our shared files in Google Drive, and that's what we go to. We really rely on, and I know it's donated to us, and we're incredibly grateful. We also, being based in DC, the way that we communicate weekly for our staff meeting with our colleague in Chicago with Xavier is via Google Hangouts. So we're really grateful to what you all have been able to create that makes our work possible and makes it possible for us to stay in constant communication with one another to strengthen our efforts. So as I mentioned, the campaign is involved in a lot of different strategies to end life without parole for kids. We do advocacy, litigation, public education, and coalition building. We host an annual convening in DC every year, which we would welcome you all to. It's a great opportunity to learn about not only the issues and the challenges people are facing, and where we learn best practices from one another, but to learn from the people directly impacted and to be in a room with them to better understand their life experiences, like Xavier's and other ICANN members, as well as victim family members. Oftentimes people are surprised to know that we work with people who've lost loved ones to youth violence, but the reality is that not all of them want to see the system throw these kids away. Many of them find it healing to see the people who killed their loved ones out and doing well in the community. These are some of the most courageous people I've ever met, and they inspire us in our work every day. And we're actually in the year ahead aspiring to launch a national network similar to ICANN of victim family members to make sure that their voices are heard, because too often it's only the victims that are seeking punitive policies and sentences that we hear from. And so in the year ahead, we are looking to better connect with those folks and create a national network. So we welcome the brilliance of Googlers in figuring out how to stay better connected and using technology to do that. We hope that, more than anything, that you'll share, information about this practice. You'll share Xavier's story. We have a video that features a number of the ICANN members who worked in Nevada last year and helped to pass a bill unanimously to ban life without parole for children. We think that, the more people recognize that this is something our country and our country alone does to our kids, and people who have kids or know teenagers or once teenagers, when you start to think about the fact that kids are, especially, kids who grow up in environments that are oppressive and do not provide the kind of opportunities that many of us have had, that the circumstances really shape young people, and that when they're given the opportunity, they can change and do great things. And so I think when people recognize that and they know that this is something that we're doing, people want to get engaged and involved. And so we'd welcome your participation, joining us on our, if you go to our website, you can sign up for our newsletters and stay involved and stay posted on the various developments around the country. And if you go to our website, you'll see that we would also welcome volunteers to help us even improve our website. We certainly look to the pros for that sort of thing. I always tell people, if your kid gets locked up, call me, and I'll look to you for whatever it is that you guys do best. And I know at Google, you guys come with incredible ideas and technology, and that's something that we would value in partnering with you guys in the future. So the other thing that we think that is really, remarkable about the young people that we work with, and many of them not young anymore, but who are in the inside, is that they have an incredible ability to not only, like Xavier was saying, reflect on sort of what their life experiences have been and how they've overcome the traumas and help to really rehabilitate themselves. Many of them have incredible skills. Many of them are artists. We get some of the most brilliant artwork sent to our office. And so one idea we had was, wouldn't it be great to have a Google Doodle from a juvenile lifer, to demonstrate that, this is the potential of these young people that we've told are worth nothing more than dying in prison, and to help people recognize that this is a population that continues to live despite being told that, and continues to hope for a second chance. So those are a couple things. We welcome your ideas, as I said. I'm just excited to be here and for the opportunity and, to tap into the world of ideas that you all bring. So thank you again, Jonathan, and thanks to everyone for taking time to hear our story and to learn about our work.